All right. Well, my clock is showing that it is 1 after 11. And so, in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. So, welcome to today's CSL in session. This is our first webinar in the Everyday Library Evaluation series. And this session will focus on ethics. My name is Christine Krieger, and I am the professional development consultant for the Colorado State Library. Before we get started today, I want to briefly introduce CSL in session for those of you who may not have had the opportunity to attend before. So we really try to focus in CSL in session not only on the content that the presenters are sharing, but also getting information and ideas from you all. So there's going to be lots of opportunities for you guys to share your thoughts and questions using chat. We also are going to use Mentimeter today. So we're trying to really engage everybody in a conversation on this topic so that we can benefit from each other's experience and expertise. So we are going to ask that you remain muted until probably the end of the session, when we may have time to unmute for questions, but do feel free to add questions along in the chat. I will help monitor the chat. We are also recording today's session, so if you know somebody who wanted to attend but wasn't able to, the archive will hopefully be available by tomorrow on Libraries Learn, and I will email everybody who registered a link to that. We are using automatic captions for today's session, and you can feel free to turn them on or off using the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And if you don't see that CC button, you can click on more and that option should appear. And then we'll hopefully have corrected captions probably within the next couple weeks posted with the archive. So it is my pleasure now to introduce today's presenters. We have staff from the Colorado State Library's Library Research Service, and I'm going to turn it over to them to take it away.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Carissa Brammer. I'm the director of the Library Research Service. I have for my team Amy Ballenhorst, Sarah Weissen, and Dana Peterson. So this is the whole gang is here today. Here is the Mentimeter information for you, just to get that out of the way, that you can go to the menti.com and enter our Mentimeter. The questions, there's probably about, well, there's like 4 or 5 questions, and then a bunch that are a part of a game that we're doing. So you can enter into that.
And
Are you
Carissa, there's
sharing
nothing
your
on the screen.
Are you sharing your screen, Carissa?
Goodness, I swear I've used a computer before. Okay, is this better? Are you seeing more than just my face?
So much better. Got it.
Okay, so go to menti.com and enter this code. And then Christine looks like she's putting that in the chat as well. Ta-da. Just be here. Okay. So today we're going to cover a lot of material about data and ethics. It's sort of just going to be like, we're just going to blitz through it. So if you have questions or this brings something up for you or anything like that, I encourage you to reach out to us at LRS. We are very much data nerds, but we're also ethics nerds, and we're always willing to talk these things out between ourselves and with y'all. This is going to be an overview of the basic concepts in the world of data and data management, including the data and evaluation lifecycle, what the best practices and the law surrounding privacy and ethical data collection, what libraries are currently collecting. We'll spend quite a bit of time on that, what we should collect and how to do that ethically, and then what we possibly should not collect at all. And then we'll do a brief discussion about research, data, surveys, interviews, etc. That is something, the questions that you should ask and the things that you should do are generally the same, no matter what data you're collecting or how, but we'll kind of interject that throughout. And then we have what we're not going to learn today. So there's no way that anyone can teach you how to make the ethical decision every single time. Unless humans suddenly become easy to understand. Since data collection is about humans and their experiences of the world, it is always going to be a little bit complicated to work through when we're making decisions. Best practices will change. Your understanding of data populations will change over time. Like with my team, we recently had a situation where we interviewed someone, and months later, when we were reviewing that data, we had some tough conversations about whether that person's answers should be included in the project due to some issues with mental illness and informed consent. Ultimately, this ended up with us reaching out to a forensic psychologist and pulling the transcript based on their advice. So things in research, even for us that do research all day, every day, this is where we live, tend to go from simple to messy to back to simple and back again. So the best thing to know is just to be ready to grapple with those things when they come up and make your best judgment with the information that you have or you can find, and reach out for help when you need it. We're introducing here the data life cycle. So most either standard data collections or research projects go through this life cycle where you start with a question. What do you want to answer? Then you go to creating a collection tool and using it. So then you go to the collection step. This also involves data storage, both the information that you're collecting and the other things that you're adding to it. And then when you get through that step, which is usually a pretty long step, then you go into the longest step, which is the analysis and synthesis of the data, and then how you're going to use it. The final step is one that I think that we forget, which is to tell people what we've done. So to share the information that we've done. One thing that Amy says all the time is that libraries love to do really cool things and then tell no one about them. So avoiding that. Repeating this collection as many times as you need to. This can be, every day or, every year, things like that. And then finally to destroy the data when it needs to be destroyed. And then we have some of the ethical considerations around this. So first is privacy protection. And I've kind of made little lines about what these connect to. So when you protect privacy, you're thinking about this when you're creating a collection tool, you're thinking about this when you collect and store the data, and you're thinking about this at the end of the cycle when you decide to destroy the data. Also when you make decisions about what to tell people. And then we have our legal obligations. So this involves data collection. There's things that we legally can and cannot collect. How we store these things often have legal obligations, and then when and whether to destroy the data. There's legal obligations around this. Then we have ethical obligations. Now it's starting to get to where ethical obligations touch everything in this. And so it's just going through those steps with, or as you go through those steps, thinking about how ethics are included. And then finally, we have, of course, we're using technology. So most of the data you collect is going to either start in or be in a technology, even if it's just Excel at some point. So thinking about how do we protect that data? How do we consider how to store that data, how and when to destroy it? It's all there. So you can see that I'm still trying to make the point that data is very messy, and you can see how this happens. I know that I've also probably missed connections here. This is just the ones that came to me at the time. And then we have this idea that libraries protect privacy. So this is our first Mentimeter question. I'll pass this over to Amy. And the question is, what does your library do to protect your patrons' data?
You all can see that okay?
Yeah, so we've got some great great answers here. Limiting who can access accounts, that's hugely important. Making sure that only people that need to are able to see it. Informed consent, I love informed consent when we're talking about, library records. Having vendors sign DPAs. What is DPA? Can someone put that in the chat? Or answer. You can also just hop on and answer.
It's a data privacy addendum.
Oh, perfect. Yes. We're going to talk a little bit about contracts at the end of this, so that'll show up there. And then, training. I love an opt-in to track usage rather than having it be an opt-out. We'll talk a little bit about how we're tracked and what's happening later in the presentation. So these are all great things. So I think, let's see. I put up here, this is from ALA. So this is it's kind of just generally trying to capture all of these things. I need to start sharing my screen again. Someday I'll remember that. Okay, and we're back. What does ALA do to protect patron privacy? So these are a lot of the things that you talked about: limiting what you're collecting, disclosing, and distributing, avoiding creating unnecessary records, don't retain records, and then past when you are legally obligated to, and then avoid the practices and procedures that put information on public view. One thing that we talk about a lot with this is how do you put out your holds? Is that providing information about people in those holds? Oh, okay. So then I brought up a photo here. This is about a privacy related case that I find very interesting. It's the Connecticut Four. They immediately after the Patriot Act fought an FBI national security letter that was delivered to them by the FBI asking for patron information that did not have a warrant. These folks, this is not what you would think about when you see this picture, but they actually fought the FBI in court for years and were able to basically refuse to provide patron information to them, and then won their lawsuit so they can talk about it. The person on the far right, I saw him present probably 10 years ago at ALA, and he talked about privacy, and this case and his presentation on it fundamentally changed the way that I thought about privacy for patrons, because it can be as easy as setting up your system so that it doesn't keep checkout records, but it can also be that you are talking to people with a great deal of social power and power over you as a person, and refusing to share that information unless they've gone through the proper channels. So kind of just being thoughtful about what are these everyday things, and then what are kind of the edge cases that we can have that relate to protecting patron privacy. I think most of us fall into the middle of these two ways of doing things. We're not, I hope not every librarian is having to face down the FBI on a regular basis. But also doing these sort of just everyday protections so that even if they come, we can be like, oh, we don't have that. So it's a good idea to just think all the time about how we're implementing services and sharing that information. And then we have another question on our Mentimeter, and it is, what information do we currently collect in libraries? Yep, we have demographic data. So we're routinely collecting a lot of demographic data about people. Oh, yeah, the opt-in reading list. So people can opt in the ILS and create reading lists for themselves. It's not something that's automatically collected. We have programming attendance. That's something that we routinely collect and that I, through the PLAR, ask you to collect. Yep. Checkouts, who's borrowing what. Yeah, ILSs are programmed. Generally, you can, the way that you turn it on, I think, at least when I was doing them, is that it only holds the last checkout so that you know that very last one, but it doesn't hold someone's full checkout history. Oh yeah, we collect requests for reconsiderations. That's been big in the news because there was that change about whether requests for reconsiderations were library use or if they are subject to QORA. Yeah. Meeting room usage. And this varies from library to library too, what they're collecting. I think HR data is something that we don't think about enough, is that we have data on ourselves too that also needs to be protected. Yeah. And I made a little very random list. So I will move back over to the presentation. This is what I came up with. We've got lots of stuff. Home address, computer use, meeting room use. It's sort of the same thing as that we were just talking about. Survey responses is one that we collect. We do a lot of surveys in libraries, and I think for good reason, because we're trying to be responsible to our communities, but they exist. And then there's just a ton more that we're not thinking about, right? So then we go into kind of the definitions section to talk really clearly about privacy and ethics. There's a few concepts that we need to be clear on. And the first is this, the personally identifiable information. This is basically any piece of information that directly identifies a person. We've got a little list here of like your geographic location. If I drop a pin, that is personally identifiable information. If I tell you my home address, if I give you my fingerprint for whatever reason, then that is personally identifiable. It's sort of all of those things that are information about us directly as a person. But as with most things, it's more complicated than it seems, because we have those things are directly identifiable, right? If my address is directly going to bring you to me right now. But then there's also quasi identifiers. If you're in a small community, you have lots of quasi identifiers about people because you just know things about people, right? These are people that you know well, you know their quirks, things like that. And you take those multiple pieces of data and then you can combine them to identify someone. So this is most obvious in a small community. This is also what Google does about us. They take all of these bits of information that they grab about us, hundreds of thousands in this case. It's a really big data set. And they can put those together and they can not only identify me, but know about me in a very clear way, even if it's not information I've directly shared. So like, if you think it's a state library and you don't know the name of the person, but you know two things about them, that they live in Denver and they have a Pomeranian dog, you've taken 3 pieces of information and gone from one of 43 people to me specifically in 2 steps, essentially 1 step. So when Google sends you an ad that feels eerily specific, like they're listening to you, it's probably that they're collecting these little bits of data and putting them together. And then all of those together give you, you know, an ad that is weird and about something you only started thinking about 45 minutes ago. So the point, and then we have anonymous data. So these are actually 2 kind of separate things. Anonymous data is data that was collected without identifiers entirely. That's something where you've specifically not asked for email address or name or connected it to a person directly in any way. Anonymized data is data that was previously identifiable and that have been de-identified. So you've stripped those things out. You've taken out names, things like that. But the point that I kind of want to make with these is that if you have enough information about a person, then it's pretty easy to re-identify them, to identify them in a data set that is even started out anonymously, just based on their answers. And we have a lot of data about our patrons generally, enough to do this. So because this is sort of this idea of re-identification is sort of a complicated process, Sarah has developed a game for us to do where we're going to go through and demonstrate how you can identify an individual out of basically an anonymous survey. Stop sharing and let Sarah, oh no, I've got the slides.
Yeah, if you would just want to click through the slides, I think that would work well. All right, thank you. So I think that this can be a really heavy, serious topic for people, and it is really important to keep in mind whenever you're working with data. And I have to watch myself sometimes, making sure like when something feels really challenging and there's a lot of complicated pieces going on, make sure I don't shut down, because this is not something we want to ignore when working with data. And I want to make sure like just like a fun way to keep it in mind all the time without it feeling like such a heavy weight constantly. So I tried to make a fun game here. And it's an oversimplified version for the sake of time and being able to work with you all virtually. It's obviously more applicable to smaller communities, and but I think that it helps. I know for me, at least, making it's really helped me keep this idea of de-identifying and anonymized data, but then also making sure that when you share out, you're keeping that anonymized throughout your process. And so obviously you'll see we have a lot of pets on the screen here. These are all my coworkers at CSL pets. They were all very happy to share their adorable photos for the sake of this game. And in this game, to explain it a little bit, this is the population. So this is like a small library community. The library serves cats and dogs, and you have some people coming in throughout the day to your library, and you have a survey out. And so the survey is going to ask question about people's library usage, and you're going to collect data, and you're not asking for, you're trying to do it right, not asking for any PII on the survey. Just want to hear people's thoughts without connecting it to the people within your community specifically. So we can probably go to the next slide. All right, so the question, one of the questions, this is an open-ended response on the survey, is if you visit the library, please share what most often brings you in. So an open-ended response for the pets that you saw previously can write whatever they want, and you collected 23 responses throughout the day. Again, it's hard to make this game like apples to apples. It takes a little stretch of the imagination, if you bear with me, but each response, you have a pile of surveys at the end of the day. Each survey has a number assigned to it, and you did not collect any PII throughout that survey. So you don't have anybody's name on the survey, but you maybe have a general idea of like who came in and took that survey. So at this point, you have de-identified the data. You have surveys, you assign a number to each survey instead of the name. This is something we do all the time after collecting, doing interviews or collecting survey responses. And yeah, you're happy with the data you collected. You found out some great things about your community population and why they come to the library. So you really want to share it out. You're excited about the data, but you might have to be careful with some of the quotes. So I'm going to share just a few possible quotes from the survey. If we go to the next slide. For example, response number 5 could say what most often brings them into the library is looking for outdoor guides because they love to be prepared on their mountain adventures. So in the Mentimeter, you can put in, we're going to leave this slide up for 20 seconds or so here, and you can put in the Mentimeter the letter of the cat or dog that you think may have said this quote. So this is kind of like a investigative detective game where you can look at each picture and then pick who you think may have said this quote.
I think most people are good, so I'm going to share the results.
Fantastic, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, yep, we have B, U, and G. So this is exactly the point here, is there might be a few options, but we narrowed it down very quickly to just a few people within the community based on that one quote. And there's also probably going to be more data collected within the survey that is those few extra data points that might just bring it down to 1. So if we go to that slide then, that next one. We have Theo. So Theo was prepared for his mountain adventures, got a little jacket on, and this is just traits about people that you notice and then can identify them by a simple quote. So we're gonna do a few of these. Hopefully it's fun. Hopefully it sticks with you and helps you remember to be careful about what data you're sharing out, specifically with small populations. So we can go to the next one here. Response number 9. The library is where I go to connect with a community of senior citizens like myself. So, yep, just like before, you can throw a letter in the Mentimeter of who may have said this quote. All right, we have M came up as a large response. We also have A, E, O, T, and U. And this is interesting because I don't think M is who I actually picked as my senior citizen for this quote, but I did throw a few up on the next slide if we want to go through it. I picked Zorba. But again, even if you didn't pick this exact senior citizen, there's probably, you can imagine within a survey, there might be more pieces of data that can connect to one or the other. We can go to the next one. This is a fun one. Response on survey number 12 that, let's say, you might want to share out because it's really powerful response. Something that is important to you that you bring to your community in the library is that people can go there and be their unique self. And so you can put a letter in the chat of, or the Mentimeter of who you think this might be. Yes. Thank you, Amy. That one does align specifically with who I picked, who likes to be their unique self in the library. We have people put C and B and D, but mostly answers were for S, which is I think we can go switch back here. This is Chi. Likes to dress up as a unicorn, so the library is a place that they can go do that. So this is a fun one. I'm sure there are other doggos out there that wanted to be their unique self at the library, but I just threw Chi up on this one because it's such an adorable photo. We can go to the next slide. All right. Oh, this one is about the atmosphere of the library. Another thing that you might want to share out, something you're proud of in your library, that it has a relaxing, nice atmosphere with lots of sunlight. And you'll notice I put anonymous in each of these just because to prove the point of like, you can try your best to make things anonymous, but if you just have put too many pieces of data together in a small population, it might not be. So let's see who people said for this letter in the Mentimeter. If P, this one's a little spread out, so that's fun. And I also threw a lot of pictures up for this one because there were, I think, several doggos that might have, or cats that could fit this description, but there was one that really stood out to me. So we can go back to the slide. And that was Polly, who likes to relax in the sunlight. You'll see we also had Deacon and Rufus, Fiona, all animals that may have enjoyed the atmosphere of the library. But okay, we'll keep on keeping on here. Okay, I think we've got 2 more. I think this is the second to last one. Honestly, I just go because I get jealous if my sister goes somewhere without me. So I threw a variety of difficulty levels in here, and I think we're getting easier, not harder. You can throw the letter in the Mentimeter again. Yep. K and L, V and W, exactly. I did pick Nala or Raven for this one. You can decide of that photo who looks the most jealous. I think it's a toss-up, but because they're in a vehicle heading somewhere was why I felt like they were most likely to share this quote. And then the last one is just for fun. The library has great sinks for napping, in case that's what anybody in your community values. So you can throw a letter in the Mentimeter one last time.
Looks like this one's missing from the Mentimeter, so for this one, you can just throw it in the chat.
Oh, perfect. No problem. Yeah. This one's not too much of a trick question. So we have Brazen. And thank you to Christine for sharing this wonderful, wonderful kitty photo. Yep, that's my game. I hope that it just is something that can help remind you when you're working with data in the future. What you're sharing out will tell people about who is in your community and who, but also who is connected to that data specifically. Thank you.
And then that's the fun part of this. And then we're going to go right back into data stuff. So this leads itself to big data. So our little fishy here, he doesn't know that the water exists because it's all around him. And that's kind of similar to the way that big data works. You know, it's in every part of our lives at this point. This is Google, the Apple ecosystem, online shopping data. Like the reason that Google knew that I was thinking about taking up making leather bags within like 12 seconds. And now all I get is like different ads for that from different people. It took them no time at all to figure that out. We make the choice to give our personal identifiers to systems all the time. We give a name or an email address to set up an account. There it is. There you are. They also exist in systems like when there's a data breach, the information that was in the system is now out of the system. So that's why we should all have our credit locked at all times, because like last month, I think there was 3 data breaches, like major data breaches in a week. This is what's happening there. So also, once you give your information to someone, they're also gobbling up a ton of information about you then, because they know you're in there. So they are gathering how much time you're spending on a system, what you're using the system to do, what you are sharing out of that system to other people. They just are gathering tons of information there. I always, when I start thinking about big data, I always feel like the thing that I want to say is to just throw your smartphone in a lake and leave the internet. Like that feels like the answer. But I think the answer is actually that we make our own choices. So for me, I have Alexas in my house. I use my phone for everything. I share my data kind of all the time because I get benefit from that, right? It makes my life easier. I also have colleagues who like would never have an Alexa in their house, right? And so we're making these choices each time for ourselves based on what is important to us, how we feel about that specific risk, things like that. But when we talk about library systems, often we're making these choices for our patrons. So making these kind of big data choices then becomes a question not of what is my risk tolerance, but what is the risk tolerance that I can expect the user of my systems to have. So I lost my place. I think the thing there is to make sure that we're making careful decisions about it. and then making those choices clear to our users. Those are kind of the two parts that you need to be doing as a library when you're setting these things up. This also relates to kind of the thing we're all thinking about right now, which is what is AI doing with our data? So what happens to our data when we feed it into one of those AI systems? And then we have a Mentimeter for that so that we can get some of your ideas about what is happening to data when we kind of toss it into an AI system. We'll have Amy pull up the Mentimeter for that. Maybe. These are all super good responses. Often it's being used to kind of teach the AI further. There's a lot of that learning that does. It's potentially being collected and sold. It could be being used to create more content for people. Can be used for anything. That's kind of the point that I want to make about AI is right now, very much depending on your system, but this is a black box for us, right? We have no idea what is happening to our data when we're feeding it into AI. And so that warrants, I don't think that there's a place where we can like walk away from AI entirely, or should we? But it warrants being really, really careful about not feeding anything in there that is a quasi identifier or a direct identifier that can be used to identify our patrons or anything like that. Back to my fishy. So just keeping that in mind, that we kind of know what like Google's doing with our data, which is selling it for sure. But with AI, we're not entirely sure what they're doing with that. So just being careful, and kind of in both instances. And then we have our friend, the Colorado Library Law. So the cool thing about Colorado is our folks have more legal data protections than in a lot of places. A law like this does not exist in many, many other states. So we've got all of these things that kind of tell us when and how we can share information. It does mention the subpoena that you can ask for that. So that's nice. It's not just a choice that's being made at the director level. That is literally the law, that you have to have a subpoena to give out information. The sharing of information between us and our library vendors that I'm talking about is sort of living in section A here, which is the reasonable operations of the library. I'm not a lawyer, so this is not legal analysis. This is just what I think. Just keep that in mind. So I think that this holds us to a reasonableness standard. We need to decide how much information we share with vendors to get access to their services, and that we need to have those service work, and then figure out kind of how do we know if we're meeting the standard. And that's definitely a library to library decision. And then this section, I originally wrote this as like a everyday library use, what questions should you ask? And then with research and surveys, what questions you should ask. But it turns out the questions are kind of the same, right? So the first is, should we collect this data at all? Is it necessary for us to find the answers to our questions? Is it necessary for reporting? Should we collect the data? This can be policy, this could be statute. There was one time at a library that I worked at that I was creating a survey, and I just put in a gender question. I just put it in there because that's what we'd always done. And I took it to my boss, and she looked at me and she was like, do we have girl books and boy books in our collection? And I was like, no. And realized that I hadn't thought about why I was asking that question. I had never thought like, what am I going to do with this information if I get it from the person taking the survey? And it was totally not necessary to ask it at all. So just having this like, should we collect this data for every question that you ask, every piece of data that you're capturing, everything about that. The next question that applies to both is, how will you share insights from this data with the population that is providing it? We should always be thinking about how are the people going to benefit from us collecting this data? Is it new services? Is it new things that are happening in the library, better collections, whatever it is? But also, how are we going to share this back out with them? Generally, this is like through reports, sometimes presentations. It might be through like a little announcement on the website, just letting people know what you're doing with the data so they don't feel about us how we feel about AI, which is like, what are we doing with this information? The next one is, where is the data stored? This is a question that if you work for the government is sometimes like literally what country is the data stored in, but it also means who has access to the computers that hold this data? Who is making copies of this data? So if we're only worrying about the security of the original thing and it's on 16 people's hardware, then it's hard drives, not hardware. Then you have kind of access is growing in a way that you didn't expect, and how are you going to limit that? Thinking about things like that. This very much goes into who needs access to the data. Somebody earlier said that they were limiting who can view patron accounts. That is a great explanation of or happening that is related to this. Is the people who need the access the same as the people who have the access? That's something to definitely think about. And then finally, not finally, because we have one more, but how long will you keep the data? So I think librarians tend to live in keep indefinitely, because we're pretty worried about what if someone needs this in the future, right? The reality is we're usually kind of living in the middle too, right? You should keep it for a stated period of time, or basically delete it immediately. So that's like with checkout history, you're deleting it immediately. With things that are state documents, you are keeping them for a certain period of time. Like it's 3 years for almost everything if you work for the state. But these are also defined at the state level, at the organizational level, and at the municipal level. There can be different periods of time that you keep something. I was working in an academic library once where we got the first records manager that they'd had in, I think, like 120 years. They've been open for a long time without this. And when he came in, he was explaining document schedules to us. And we had been thinking, okay, you have to keep this for 3 years. That means I can keep it for 20 years, right? Because 3 years is the minimum that their law requires. But he made it very clear that that actually means 3 years. You delete that information after 3 years. You don't keep it for 7 because you might need it then. This information, if it's on a 3-year schedule, is only 3 years. And that was a really big change for me and for the library. And we've got a question in the chat about retention periods for incident reports. So this is a great question. So keeping that in mind. And then the final one is, how do you get informed consent to collect and store the data? This can take different forms. In research, it's often your informed consent document where you tell people what you're doing, how you're going to manage the data, and how you're going to report it back to them, and then they can consent to participate or not. In a library, it might be they're consenting when they fill out the form to get a library card. That is a form of consent. If they fill it out, then they've consented to you having and using that information. So just thinking about how we always have that informed consent. And then I think our final question is, what information are we sharing with vendors about our patrons? Stop sharing, pass over to Amy. A lot of times you'll be using library card number for logins. I feel like this pause might be an I don't know. The information that you're sharing with them will typically be in your contract. Oh, number of patrons, yeah, that's how they charge us, is based on FTE. The subjects that they're accessing, so the things that they're actually doing in the system, that's great. Some are collecting age group, which is, how would they collect that? That's interesting. So that's information that's like super useful to you, right? When you are analyzing that, but what does that mean for the patrons? We don't know. We'll sometimes have patron address. Yeah, these are great. Personal email address. I've given that to many library systems in order to set up accounts that they can then use to do these other things, like tracking my subjects that I've accessed and other things. And then I will move back to the presentation, maybe. Another question for you that's not actually, I won't make you do a Mentimeter for it, but it's just thinking about, do you have standard language that you use with every contract that says what information that you're willing to share? How are you letting the users know? I know I think Michigan, their library does like a big pop-up when you access any electronic resource that shows exactly what you're sharing with them and lets them make the choice to use or not to use that product based on that information. There are options there. You could have some boilerplate language that you share with people about, you know, being careful with their information, things like that. And then up on the screen now, I have privacy policy. So privacy policies are generally where vendors will share what they want to see as far as information sharing. This is actually Canopy's privacy policy from 2018. And we want to look at this section 3A. I actually, in 2018, I was negotiating this contract and I called a lawyer about this. And this section actually says that they can basically do whatever they want with your data. They can sell it to whoever they want. They can share it with whoever they want. So I asked the lawyer, I was like, does this mean they're selling the data? And he was like, probably, like they're leaving that door open, right? This was a really big sticking point for a lot of us and something that we negotiated into the contract. And not only from pushback from librarians, but also I believe they were acquired by a library company. Now we're looking at a privacy policy that's very specific about what they do with the information and does not have that part in it where it says, you know, we can sell this if we feel like it. They're very specific about when they share it, who they're sharing it with, all of those things. So I think this is an example of a positive change in a contract with a vendor that came from, they're not going to change these policies just because, but it comes from pressure from people purchasing and also from different changes in contracts. The main thing is, the main thing to think about when looking at these contracts is all of this is negotiable, right? This privacy policy is what they want, but you are able to put into your contract whatever safeguards you can get in there, right? So you can write that they can never share the third party with the third party. And if they accept that contract, then that's what will carry, not their policy. So this is just to encourage you to both push back on them because it will lead to these positive changes over time, but also to put into your contracts what you want to see for your folks. And you're not going to win 100% of it, but you can get some pretty substantial changes to how these companies are acting and with our patron data just based on being willing to do that contract negotiation. So a recap, because I've gone through a lot of things today. Data has a life cycle and all the parts of it are important, including the part where you delete the data. Libraries protect privacy. I think we're great at this. We're probably one of the aside from like maybe medical, one of the best at doing this because it's such a part of our culture and also just something that is required by law and other things. Anonymity is a hard thing to guarantee. So we all found the dog with the little unicorn horn immediately, I would imagine. So keep that in mind. Big data and vendors want to know everything about us, but we have choices. We always have choices. Always be thinking about why, how, and how long you keep it when you collect data. And then everything is negotiable with vendors. So use that to increase patron privacy. That's sort of the points that I wanted you to get. And then we have our standard survey that we would like you to take, that we, this information, as far as informed consent, this goes to IMLS. So it's stored in our systems, and then we send it to IMLS with our annual reports that they require for our funding. And we've saved a few minutes for questions. Are there any questions or comments?
Yeah, we still have about 9 minutes left. So if you guys have questions, you can feel free to unmute or type them in chat, whichever you prefer. And I know earlier, one of the participants had asked a question about how long, kind of curious about how long organizations are keeping incident reports. And so if you have information about what your library does, you can feel free to add that to chat as well.
For sure. And for the state, we're lucky because there's a guy at the archives that will answer these questions. So we just shoot him an email and he tells us how long things have to live. But I know it's more complicated for libraries and it's potentially going to be a local choice.
Any other thoughts or questions about the first in this webinar series? We've got 2 more that are coming up that you can register for on Libraries Learn. I'll pop the URL in.
So I know this is Dana from LRS. And it just occurred to me as we were playing the dog game, all of those were definitely qualitative questions. So it would seem that, gosh, when we do collect data, should we just only go to quantitative data? Because that would be a way to somewhat more anonymize. I guess not, though, if the answers were in the things that would have identified the dogs. But can you speak to privacy at all in relation to qualitative versus quantitative data collection?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, go ahead. I'll have Sarah do it.
I think that you can speak to this a little as well, Carissa, for sure. But I just wanted to address, because I was glad you asked that, Dana, because as I was going through this, I was like, well, that is like valuable qualitative data, all those quotes, and they are in and of themselves with a large enough population, like there's not a rule that says if someone writes that in the survey, like you couldn't then share a quote out about the atmosphere of the library having lots of great sunlight, like that. In this specific scenario, it was pretty identifiable, but not in all scenarios. And so I still think that there is like a huge value to the qualitative data as long as you're keeping the specific scenarios, population or survey population size and things in mind, and looking at quotes to make sure that they are anonymous enough. And then to speak to like the quantifiable versus the qualitative data, I think using aggregate data in many cases to like the quantitative data can be very valuable as a whole, and there's no individual PII within that then, because you have aggregated that to a like averages and total sums, and you're not pulling individuals out of that. So I think sometimes when you're doing that, there's a little bit less danger there if you're aggregating the data versus qualitative data, which you could pull out themes instead of those direct quotes and share themes that reoccurred over and over again. And then you're also kind of eliminating some of that danger there of identifying your participants. I might have gotten a little sidetracked
No.
there, but hopefully that answered your question.
I think that's a great point, because it's like you aggregate it, because if you know, this is when you start saying quasi identifiers, right? If you know someone's between 40 and 45 and somebody visits the library 3 times a week and you know their gender identity, then it's going to be pretty easy to find that person, right? If there's only one person or 3 people in that group. So I think that aggregating and pulling this up is a good way to keep it, avoid being able to do that, because given enough points of information, either qualitative or quantitative, you can narrow down to the person.
Any other questions before we wrap up the first of our series today?
I love Elena's comment here about looking at our survey that we created after we talked about this. So if you have any comments on our survey, please also let us know.
We'll send you another survey to comment on the survey. So you can look forward to that. So I'm not seeing any other questions come through. If you think of questions later, you can reach out to us, either me directly, and I can make sure that LRS can address it. Once again, we did record today's session. The chat will not be recorded. Basically, what people will see is the slides and the person who was talking during each section. But I will send that out to everybody who registered, hopefully by tomorrow morning. Carissa, may I have a copy of the slides to upload as a PDF to Libraries Learn as well? So that way people can take a closer look, especially at some of the data heavy slides. Perfect. So with that, I really want to thank Carissa and Sarah and Amy for putting on this session, and Dana for being back up and asking some great questions as we went through as well. And I want to thank everybody who took the time to attend today. I think it's a really important topic as we're kind of thinking about the data that we collect and where everyday ethics kind of come into all of this. So with that, I would like to wish everybody a really great rest of your day.